1887, Arizona. Red Knife's capture at Diablo Canyon. The bounty hunter, the canyon, the war cry. The sun rose slowly over the Arizona desert, spilling light across the rugged mesas and dry riverbeds. The land was harsh and unforgiving, with jagged cliffs and scattered cacti standing like silent guards over the empty stretches of sand. In this wild place, life was always a fight, and the people who lived here had to be sharp, fast, and careful. Among them, there was a man whose name whispered fear and respect alike: Red Knife. Red Knife was an Apache warrior, and his reputation had spread far beyond his tribe. He had become a figure both feared and admired. Known for his daring raids and clever escapes, he had never been caught, no matter how many men tried. Ranchers and settlers told stories of how he could vanish into the desert as if the wind had taken him. Soldiers who had hunted him spoke of his courage, skill, and cunning. The Apache called him a protector of their land, while the others saw him as a dangerous outlaw. Either way, his name carried weight in every town and canyon in Arizona. The bounty on Red Knife's head had grown over the years. It was not a small sum. The law wanted him captured, alive if possible, but dead if necessary. Many had tried. Some were soldiers, well-trained and armed with rifles, moving in groups and using every trick they knew. Others were bounty hunters, men who lived by the law of reward and danger. Most of them returned empty-handed, beaten by the desert, by the Apache, or by their own mistakes. Red Knife had become more than a man in these stories. He was a shadow in the canyons, a ghost in the sand, a puzzle that no one could solve. One of those bounty hunters who had come to know Red Knife's legend well was a man named Thomas Gray. He was in his late 30s, tall and lean, with a face marked by the sun and years of experience in the wild. His eyes were sharp, constantly scanning, never resting. He had walked the deserts of Arizona, the hills of New Mexico, and the forests of Texas. He had faced storms, starvation, and danger of every kind. But Red Knife was different. This was a man who understood the land better than anyone, who could disappear into the rocks and return where he was least expected. Thomas had followed Red Knife's trail for months, piecing together the stories and sightings, trying to find the rhythm of his movements. The bounty hunter traveled lightly. He carried only what he needed: his rifle, a few pistols, extra bullets, dried meat, and water. He knew the desert could be cruel, taking the weak quickly and sparing only those who understood its ways. He watched the tracks of animals and men alike, learned to read the subtle marks left in sand or soil, and could tell by the shape of a footprint how many people had passed by. Every step, every movement had to be measured, or the desert would teach him a lesson he might not survive. Red Knife had a band with him, though it was small. A few trusted men who knew him and respected him. They were as skilled as he was, moving silently, speaking only when necessary, and vanishing like smoke when danger approached. They knew the desert like their own hands, understood the ways of the wind, the shade, and the sun. Red Knife led them, but he also watched them, teaching without words and guiding with quiet authority. Their loyalty was absolute, and they would fight to the last breath if needed. The people of the towns near the canyon spoke of Red Knife in low voices, often at night when the wind rattled shutters and dust blew across the streets. Some remembered raids that had happened years before: cattle taken, horses stolen, and supplies vanished. Others spoke of how he had spared certain settlers, especially those who treated the land and the Apache with respect. These stories created a strange mix of fear and admiration. Red Knife was not cruel for the sake of cruelty. He was clever, cautious, and guided by his own sense of honor. Thomas Gray moved carefully through the desert, following a trail that was faint but present. He had learned that patience was as important as skill. Rushing would only alert Red Knife and his band. He stopped to examine footprints, broken branches, and traces of fire from recent camps. Each clue told a story. A scorched piece of grass might mark a campfire. A bent cactus might indicate a passage of a person carrying weight. Gray listened to the wind, noting its direction, and watched the sky for the sun's position. In the desert, even small mistakes could be fatal. It was at dawn when Gray first saw signs that Red Knife's band had passed recently. The tracks were fresh, the earth still soft, the marks of horse hooves and boots clear in the morning light. Gray felt a thrill of both excitement and caution. This was the moment he had been waiting for, but he also knew the danger. Red Knife would not allow himself to be caught easily. He would have left traps, misdirections, and scouts. Every part of the land could be a weapon in his hands. Red Knife and his men were moving cautiously, too. They had heard rumors of bounty hunters closing in and knew that someone with skill and patience might be following them. Red Knife never underestimated his enemy, and he trusted the land to protect him. He used the rocks for cover, the shadows for movement, and the wind to carry his war cries when needed. He was a master of the terrain, a man whose presence was felt even when unseen. The desert around them was alive with sound and motion. Birds called from the cliffs, snakes slithered through the brush, and the wind carried dust in swirling patterns. Gray moved slowly, careful not to disturb anything. Every small noise could alert Red Knife, and every mistake could cost him dearly. He felt the tension in his muscles, the strain in his mind, and the pulse of the desert in his veins. He was in the presence of a legend, and he knew that catching Red Knife would be a test of everything he had learned. Even as the morning sun climbed higher, Gray remained hidden. He observed a small ridge where Red Knife might rest. He could see shadows moving, hear the faint rustle of cloth and leather. Red Knife's war cry had not sounded yet, but Gray could sense the power of the man, the respect of his followers, and the danger that lingered in every step. He remembered the stories, how Red Knife had once outsmarted a group of soldiers by leading them into a canyon maze where they became trapped by the terrain. Gray knew he could not afford arrogance or haste. By mid-morning, Gray had decided on a careful approach. He would track, observe, and wait for the perfect moment. Red Knife was clever, but Gray had his own knowledge of the land. He had learned to read signs that others ignored, to notice patterns in the desert, and to anticipate movement. Gray understood that this hunt was more than a chase. It was a game of patience, strategy, and respect for a man who was both his quarry and his equal in skill. As the sun rose higher, the desert heat began to bake the earth, and Gray felt the strain in his body. Water was scarce, and the air shimmered with heat. He paused, taking a moment to drink and to consider his next steps. He thought of the towns he had passed, of the settlers who feared Red Knife, and of the man himself, moving unseen through the canyon lands. Gray's determination was strong, but so was his caution. He knew that one wrong move could mean failure or death. Red Knife, meanwhile, moved with quiet authority. He signaled his men with small gestures, stopping briefly to survey the land, to check the wind, and to listen. He knew that someone might be following, and he trusted his instincts to guide him. His respect for the desert was as strong as his respect for his people. He was a man of action, but he was patient and deliberate, understanding that the land could protect him as much as it could challenge him. By late afternoon, both hunter and hunted were aware of each other's presence, though neither had made a direct move. The tension was thick, like the heat hanging over the desert floor. Gray felt the thrill of the chase, the pull of history, and the weight of the responsibility. Red Knife felt the pulse of his land, the presence of the desert, and the knowledge that he had once again drawn an opponent who would test him. The sun began to sink, casting long shadows across the mesas and canyons. Gray found a hidden spot to rest for the night, carefully choosing a place where he could watch the ridge without being seen. Red Knife made camp with his band, using the natural cover of the canyon to hide from any eyes that might watch. Fires were small, movements quiet, and every action deliberate. Both men knew that the next day could bring the first real test of skill, courage, and patience. As night fell over the Arizona desert, the land seemed to hold its breath. The wind whispered through the canyons, the stars shone bright above, and the story of Red Knife continued to unfold. This was a land of danger, beauty, and history, where men were tested by the harshness of nature and the cunning of others. In the quiet, both Red Knife and Thomas Gray waited, knowing that the desert had many lessons to teach and that the chase had only just begun. The legend of Red Knife would continue to grow, but so would the determination of the man who followed him. The desert had a story to tell, and it was a story of patience, skill, and the meeting of two men bound by respect, danger, and the endless challenge of the wild. The morning air was cool in the Arizona desert, a sharp contrast to the heat that would soon arrive. Thomas Gray moved slowly, careful not to disturb a single stone or mark in the sand. Every step was deliberate. The tracks he had followed yesterday led him toward a series of small ridges, broken rock formations, and dry washes that could hide both men and danger. Gray knew that Red Knife was not far ahead, and the tension in the air was thick, like the heat before a storm. Gray studied the desert around him. He noticed the way the shadows fell between the rocks, how the wind shifted the sand, and how the birds reacted to movement below. Every detail mattered. He had learned long ago that the desert spoke in subtle ways. The rustle of brush, the shape of a footprint, the direction of smoke from a small fire, all of these could give a clue about Red Knife's path. Gray took careful notes in his mind, marking landmarks he could use to predict the band's movement. Red Knife moved with equal care. He knew he was being followed. The desert, for all its vastness, could not hide him completely, but it could protect him if he used it wisely. He signaled to his men with slight gestures, directing them to move quietly and spread out to cover more ground. His eyes constantly scanned the ridges, the canyons, and the open spaces. He listened to the wind and watched the sun's position, knowing that any mistake could bring his pursuer too close. The small band traveled lightly, carrying only what they needed: a few blankets, weapons, dried food, and water. They moved with a rhythm that matched the desert, pausing at shadows, avoiding open spaces, and taking care not to leave evidence. Red Knife understood the land as if it were a part of him. He could spot a hidden ravine from a distance, notice footprints that others would miss, and sense when danger was near. His men trusted him completely, following his guidance without question. Gray had to be cautious. He was not only tracking Red Knife, but also watching for natural dangers. The desert was filled with hazards: venomous snakes hidden in the rocks, sudden drops in the canyon floors, and scorching sun that could weaken a man faster than any enemy. Gray paused often, crouching behind boulders, observing distant ridges, and listening for signs of movement. Every small detail mattered. He could see hoof marks that indicated horses, the broken stems of desert plants that suggested someone had passed, and even the faint smell of smoke that might reveal a hidden camp. By late morning, Gray noticed something unusual. A small ridge ahead had stones arranged in a way that suggested they had been moved recently. He crouched low and observed. The placement of the rocks, combined with faint tracks leading into a nearby wash, told him that Red Knife's band had passed through not long ago. Gray felt a surge of determination. This was the first real evidence he had found that gave him confidence the hunt was within reach. Red Knife, aware that the bounty hunter might be close, had slowed his pace. He led his men into a narrow canyon, where high walls of rock offered cover and made it difficult for anyone to follow directly. He knew that the terrain would work in his favor. The canyon had many twists, turns, and hidden recesses, and he could disappear behind a boulder or over a ridge in moments. Red Knife had survived for years in this land because he understood it better than anyone else. Gray studied the canyon from a distance. He knew entering too soon could be dangerous. The narrow paths could lead him into traps, and Red Knife was clever enough to anticipate such moves. Gray decided to watch and wait. He crouched behind a rocky outcrop, observing the canyon entrance and listening carefully. The wind carried distant sounds, the faint call of birds, the movement of animals, and the quiet whispers of the desert. Gray's experience taught him to separate these sounds from the ones that mattered. The hours passed slowly. Gray remained still, sometimes adjusting his position slightly to get a better view. He knew that patience was as important as skill. Red Knife was not a man who could be caught by rushing. He had to outthink him, understand his patterns, and wait for the right opportunity. The desert demanded respect, and Gray respected both the land and his quarry. Meanwhile, Red Knife had paused to allow his men to rest briefly. They found a small shaded area beneath a rock overhang, where the sun did not reach, and they drank water sparingly, careful not to waste a single drop. Red Knife observed his surroundings carefully. He could sense that someone might be following. The land told him stories if one knew how to listen. He watched the ridges and listened to the wind. Every detail mattered. Gray noticed the pause from a distance. He saw figures moving cautiously and realized that this was the moment to study them further. He could not approach directly, but he could learn from their actions. He watched how Red Knife moved, how he positioned his men, and how he scanned the canyon. Gray admired the man's skill, even as he knew that his duty was to capture him. This was not a fight of brute force. It was a test of patience, intelligence, and observation. As the day continued, the desert heat grew stronger. The sun beat down on the rocky canyon floor, creating waves of shimmer in the air. Gray felt the sweat on his forehead, the dryness in his throat, and the tension in his muscles. Every step had to be careful. Every move measured. Red Knife's men were trained to notice these things, to spot the slightest mistake. Gray knew that any error could cost him the chance to catch the band. Red Knife decided it was time to move again. He led his men deeper into the canyon, where the path became more rugged and the rocks steeper. The canyon walls grew higher, shadows longer, and the wind shifted, creating eerie sounds. He used the terrain to hide the movement of his men, guiding them over rocks and through narrow passages that would slow down any pursuer. The desert became his ally, shaping the path to his advantage. Gray followed carefully, choosing routes that allowed him to remain unseen while keeping the band in sight. He used every trick he knew, moving silently over rocks, using the shadows for cover, and anticipating the band's next steps. He noted every pattern, every pause, and every movement. This was a careful dance between hunter and hunted, and Gray knew that the outcome depended on his patience and observation. By late afternoon, Gray had seen enough to understand Red Knife's likely destination. There was a larger canyon ahead, one with steep walls and hidden recesses that could serve as a natural stronghold. Gray knew that the final encounter would likely happen there. He adjusted his approach, moving slowly but steadily, marking landmarks and planning for the moments ahead. He had to remain cautious. Red Knife was clever, and the canyon would favor him if Gray rushed. Red Knife's band also sensed the approach of evening. They needed to find a safe place to rest before nightfall. The canyon offered shelter, water from a small spring, and protection from prying eyes. Red Knife signaled his men with subtle gestures, directing them to positions where they could watch the surroundings while remaining hidden. He knew that nightfall would bring new challenges, and he prepared accordingly. Gray watched from a distance as the band settled into a shaded area. He noted the positions, the patterns, and the terrain. He understood that tomorrow would be the real test. Today had been a day of observation, tracking, and careful movement. He had gained valuable insight into the band's patterns and Red Knife's leadership. The desert had tested him, but he had survived and learned. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the canyon grew quiet. Shadows stretched across the rocks, and the desert became a mix of dark shapes and silent sounds. Gray found a hidden spot to rest for the night, careful to remain unseen. He ate a small portion of dried meat, drank a little water, and reflected on the day's progress. He knew that the final pursuit was near, and that the challenges would grow more difficult as he approached the heart of the canyon. Red Knife, lying beneath the rocks with his men, listened to the desert at night. The wind whispered, the rocks creaked, and the canyon held stories of past and present. He could sense the hunter nearby, the presence of someone who would not give up easily. Red Knife's thoughts were calm and focused. He trusted his skills, his land, and his men. The desert had always been his ally, and he knew that the next day could decide the outcome of this pursuit. Night fell fully, bringing cool air and the quiet sounds of the desert. Gray and Red Knife, though separated by distance and purpose, both understood the rules of the land. This was a place where patience mattered, where skill determined survival, and where respect for the desert was essential. Both men prepared for the next day, knowing that the chase would continue and that the desert still held many challenges. The story of Red Knife and the bounty hunter Thomas Gray moved forward, like the slow turning of the desert sun. Both men were bound by skill, determination, and the harsh lessons of Arizona's wild lands. The hunt was far from over, but the first steps had been taken. The desert had tested them, taught them, and set the stage for the encounter that would come in the canyon's heart. The morning light barely touched the top of the canyon walls, and the shadows stretched long across the rocky floor. Thomas Gray moved carefully, feeling the weight of the day ahead. He had followed Red Knife through the desert and the small ridges, and now the trail led straight into Diablo Canyon, a place as dangerous as it was beautiful. The canyon was deep, its walls jagged and steep, filled with twisting paths, hidden recesses, and narrow ledges that could hold both hunter and hunted. Gray knew that this was the real test. Red Knife's movements were deliberate. He had led his small band into the canyon, knowing that the land itself could protect them. Every step was measured. He used high ledges to watch the trail below, small caves to hide his men, and rocky formations to confuse anyone who might follow. He knew the canyon like the back of his hand, every crack in the rocks, every slope of the ground, every shadow told him something about the land and the people in it. Red Knife trusted the canyon to hide him, but he also knew that a clever hunter could turn even the desert against him. Gray approached slowly, using rocks and shadows to stay hidden. The canyon walls rose high, and the path narrowed in some places until it was barely wide enough for a single horse. Gray dismounted and led his horse carefully, knowing that any noise could reveal his position. He studied the tracks in the dirt, hoofprints, boot marks, and signs of movement that showed Red Knife's path. Each step told a story. He could see where the band had rested, where they had eaten, and the paths they had chosen to stay hidden. Red Knife paused and looked over the canyon. He had seen small signs that someone was following, though he could not be certain how close. He signaled to his men with subtle gestures, telling them to stay alert and move quietly. They trusted him completely. The canyon offered many advantages, but it also required constant vigilance. One small mistake could lead them into danger. Red Knife moved with calm determination, knowing that the land and his knowledge were his greatest allies. Gray studied the canyon carefully. He could see the small fires from yesterday's camp, now cold and abandoned. He noted the small details, broken twigs, shifted rocks, and marks on the walls where Red Knife's men might have climbed. Gray understood that this hunt was not just about speed or strength. It was about patience, observation, and using the land as a tool. He moved slowly, taking care not to leave tracks that Red Knife could follow back to him. As the sun climbed higher, the canyon grew warmer. The rocks reflected heat and the shadows shifted quickly. Gray adjusted his path, climbing small ledges to get a better view of the canyon below. From this height, he could see the twists and turns of the canyon floor and estimate the band's direction. He saw a narrow passage that led deeper into the heart of the canyon, and he knew that Red Knife would likely use it. Gray waited, crouched behind a boulder, and watched. Red Knife and his men approached the same narrow passage. They moved silently, stepping carefully over loose stones, listening to the sound of the wind and watching for signs of pursuit. Red Knife's mind was alert. He knew the bounty hunter was close, and he expected a challenge. He had survived many dangers in the past, but this canyon was different. The walls were steep, the paths treacherous, and the hunter persistent. Red Knife relied on his instincts and his knowledge of the land to guide him. Gray saw the movement below. He could hear the faint sound of rocks shifting and the rustle of cloth as Red Knife and his men moved. He adjusted his position, keeping hidden while keeping them in sight. Every detail mattered. The way they walked, the spacing between men and their use of the shadows, all gave Gray clues about how to approach. He understood that rushing into the canyon would be a mistake. Red Knife knew every step, and any misstep could be deadly. The narrow canyon twisted sharply, creating blind corners and small alcoves. Red Knife used these to his advantage. He paused at one bend, peering carefully around the rock face. He signaled to one of his men, pointing to a hidden ledge above. The man moved silently, taking position where he could see any approaching threat without being seen. Red Knife trusted his band and they trusted him. The canyon was dangerous, but with careful movement and knowledge, it became a place of power for them. Gray considered his options. He could wait and observe, but the canyon would eventually force a confrontation. He decided to move cautiously along a higher ledge that would allow him to see more of the path below. He climbed carefully, testing each foothold and keeping his rifle ready. Gray knew that he could not underestimate Red Knife. Every action had to be precise. The hunter became part of the land, moving like a shadow, patient and alert. The day grew hotter, and the canyon seemed to close in. The walls reflected the sun's heat, and every step required careful planning. Gray noticed a small cave on the side of the canyon, likely used by Red Knife's men for rest or observation. He crouched behind a rock, studying the entrance. The cave offered a clear view of the narrow path, and Gray realized that Red Knife could be watching him as well. The tension between hunter and hunted grew, silent but powerful. Red Knife paused again. He sensed movement from above. He signaled to his men to stay low and hidden. The canyon echoed faint sounds, a stone rolling, the distant call of a bird, the whisper of the wind. Red Knife's ears and eyes were sharp. He had survived by noticing these details, by using every sense, and by anticipating danger. He moved carefully, guiding his band deeper into the canyon while staying alert. Gray moved along the ledge slowly. He could see Red Knife's band below, but he also knew that the canyon had many hiding places. One wrong move, one snapped twig, or one misstep could alert the men below. He focused on every detail: the shadows, the footprints, the rustle of cloth, and the movement of the sun. The canyon had become a chessboard, and Gray and Red Knife were carefully placing their moves. By mid-afternoon, Gray saw an opportunity. A bend in the canyon created a narrow corridor, and Red Knife's men would have to pass through it. Gray crouched behind a boulder, preparing to observe more closely. He could see their movements clearly and understand their pattern. He noted how Red Knife positioned his men, how he signaled, and how the band responded. Gray realized that the capture would require patience, timing, and careful use of the canyon's terrain. Red Knife, aware of the lead taken by Gray's observation, continued to move with precision. He signaled to a man to climb a small ledge on the side of the canyon to watch for danger. Another man moved quietly to cover a bend in the path. Red Knife himself stayed in the center, guiding his band while remaining alert to every sound and movement. He knew that the canyon could be a trap as easily as it could be protection. His skills, knowledge, and calm mind were his greatest weapons. As the sun began to lower, the canyon grew darker in the shadows, and the air cooled slightly. Gray moved along another ledge, careful to stay hidden while keeping Red Knife and his band in sight. He noted the positions, the spacing, and the path that would likely lead deeper into the canyon. Gray understood that the next steps were critical. The canyon would soon reveal whether skill, patience, or chance would decide the outcome of this pursuit. Red Knife paused for a moment, listening to the canyon around him. The wind, the shifting rocks, and the distant sound of movement all gave him information. He signaled to his men to remain quiet and follow closely. The canyon was alive with sound, movement, and shadow. Red Knife's presence was calm and commanding, and his men moved with trust and respect. They knew that the land could protect them if they used it wisely, but danger was always near. Gray settled into a hidden spot for a brief rest. He drank water slowly, ate a small piece of dried meat, and studied the canyon. He understood the complexity of the path ahead and the skill of his quarry, and patience and careful observation had brought him this far, but he knew that the true challenge was coming. The canyon would test both men, and the next encounter could determine the outcome of this long pursuit. The day passed quietly after that, but both men remained alert. Red Knife guided his band deeper into the canyon, using every natural feature to hide, protect, and observe. Gray stayed above, hidden among rocks, watching and learning. The desert had led them here to the heart of Diablo Canyon, where the next steps would be the most dangerous, the most thrilling, and the most decisive. The story of the hunt had reached a critical point. The desert, the canyon, and the men had all played their roles. Red Knife's skill and the bounty hunter's patience were matched in a silent, tense game. The canyon seemed alive with anticipation, and the land itself held its breath. Tomorrow would bring the next stage of this pursuit, and the outcome remained uncertain, hanging on the edge of shadow, rock, and courage. The morning air in Diablo Canyon was quiet and heavy, filled with the smells of sun-heated rocks and the faint scent of desert plants. Thomas Gray had positioned himself on a narrow ledge, watching the canyon floor below. He could see Red Knife and his small band moving carefully, navigating the twists and turns of the canyon with practiced skill. Gray knew this was the moment where patience would meet opportunity. The capture, if it came, would not be by luck. It would be by intelligence, observation, and timing. Red Knife led his men with calm authority. Every step was deliberate, every pause intentional. He had sensed the presence of someone following, though he could not see Gray directly. The canyon had many hiding places, and he used each one to protect his band and gain an advantage. The men moved in a line, following his signals, their eyes sharp and ears alert. They understood the risks, but their trust in Red Knife was absolute. Gray studied their movements. He saw the way they crossed narrow paths, stepped carefully over loose stones, and paused at each corner. He noted the rhythm of their steps, the patterns of their pauses, and the signals Red Knife gave. Gray realized that the canyon was both a challenge and an opportunity. Its twists and hidden ledges could trap or protect, depending on how one moved. He knew that if he waited for the perfect moment, he could finally confront Red Knife directly. The canyon walls rose steeply on either side, creating long shadows and echoing every sound. Gray listened carefully. The faint sound of a rock shifting, the rustle of cloth, or the distant call of a bird could indicate movement. He moved slowly along the ledge, adjusting his position to maintain sight without revealing himself. His heart beat steadily, but he felt a growing excitement. The chase had lasted for weeks, but now, in the heart of Diablo Canyon, he sensed that the hunt would soon reach its conclusion. Red Knife paused at a bend in the canyon. He signaled his men to stop and look around. He scanned the rocks, listening to the wind, feeling the presence of the desert. He knew that danger could be above or below, ahead or behind. The canyon could hide many things, but Red Knife trusted his instincts and his knowledge of the land. He signaled to one of his men to move to a higher ledge, providing a lookout in case someone approached from above. The man climbed carefully, remaining hidden in the shadows. Gray watched the movements from his ledge. He saw the lookout climb and took note of the angles, the positions, and the likely paths of approach. He understood that Red Knife would be alert, but that the man had to trust the terrain as much as his instincts. Gray began planning his move carefully. He would not rush. One false step could give Red Knife the advantage. The capture would come from cleverness and timing, not brute force. The sun climbed higher, casting bright light across the canyon floor and making the shadows shift constantly. Gray adjusted his position again, moving along a narrow ledge to get a better view of the canyon below. He could see Red Knife signaling to his men, moving them in small circles, and pausing frequently. Gray realized that Red Knife's strategy was to keep them constantly moving, never allowing anyone to anticipate their next step. But Gray had patience. He had learned to read patterns in movement, in pauses, and in the desert itself. Red Knife and his men entered a narrower section of the canyon. The walls pressed closer, the shadows grew longer, and the path twisted sharply. Red Knife's movements became even more deliberate. He led his men over uneven ground, through small recesses in the rock, and past areas where the canyon widened into open spaces. He understood that the terrain could be both an ally and a threat. Every step was calculated, every pause intentional. Gray waited silently above. He knew that the final moment could come soon. He had to choose carefully where and when to act. He observed a bend in the canyon where the path narrowed even more. Red Knife's men would have to pass through one at a time. Gray realized this could be the opportunity he had been waiting for. He crouched low, preparing for the moment when he could move into position without being seen. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind slowed, the birds quieted, and the canyon echoed only the soft steps of men moving through rocks and sand. Gray watched every movement, measuring the distance, noting the shadows, and timing each pause. He understood that the capture would not be violent if he could use the terrain to his advantage. Red Knife was clever, but the canyon could shape events in Gray's favor if he was patient. Red Knife paused at the narrowest point in the canyon, He signaled his men to move slowly, one at a time. He positioned himself strategically, allowing his men to pass while maintaining control of the path. He sensed that danger might be near, but he trusted the canyon and his instincts. Every move was careful, every step deliberate. Red Knife's experience and knowledge of the land gave him confidence, but he remained alert to any sign of threat. Gray made his move. He slipped along the ledge, using shadows and rocks for cover. He positioned himself above the narrow passage, where Red Knife's men would have no escape route. Gray's heart beat steadily. This was the culmination of weeks of pursuit, and he knew that the moment had to be precise. One wrong action could alert Red Knife, but one careful move could end the chase. Red Knife's band began to move through the narrow passage. Gray observed their spacing, their timing, and their focus on the path. He saw how Red Knife guided them, signaling with small gestures, keeping them alert and safe. Gray knew that the man below was a master of strategy, but he also knew that he had learned the canyon's patterns. Gray waited until Red Knife reached the center of the passage, then prepared to call out, not with violence, but with authority and surprise. At the right moment, Gray stepped slightly from his cover, his rifle raised but not aimed to harm. He called out in a clear, steady voice, "Red Knife, the chase is over. You are surrounded. Come quietly, and no one will be harmed." The sound echoed through the canyon, startling the band below. Red Knife froze for a moment, then signaled his men to hold position. His eyes scanned the rocks above, and he recognized the hunter's strategy immediately. Red Knife's war cry echoed softly, not as a shout of anger, but as a signal of caution and readiness. His men paused, tense but alert. Gray lowered his rifle slightly, showing that he did not intend unnecessary violence. He understood Red Knife's skill and respect for the land. The canyon had become a stage for the final act, and Gray knew that the outcome would be decided by wit, patience, and mutual understanding of the terrain. Red Knife moved carefully, stepping closer to a safer position while keeping his men in line. He studied Gray, noting the precision, patience, and strategy that had brought the hunter here. He recognized skill when he saw it and understood that this confrontation could end without bloodshed, if handled correctly. Red Knife signaled to his men to stay calm and follow his lead. The canyon echoed only the soft sounds of movement in the distant wind. Gray moved closer, keeping his position high and visible, but cautious. He watched as Red Knife and his men positioned themselves strategically, ready to respond if necessary, but also willing to listen. Gray spoke again in a steady tone. "Red Knife, it's over. There is no need for anyone to be hurt. Come with me peacefully, and the bounty will be honored." His voice carried authority, but also respect, acknowledging the skill and leadership of the man below. Red Knife considered the situation. He had led his band through many dangers, but now the canyon had presented a challenge he could not ignore. He saw the hunter's patience, his careful observation, and his respect for the land and its people. With a small gesture, Red Knife signaled to his men to lower their weapons and follow him. Step by step he moved toward Gray, maintaining calm and composure. The tension in the canyon eased slightly, replaced by a quiet respect between two men who understood skill, courage, and the desert. The final moments in Diablo Canyon were tense but controlled. Red Knife's men followed his lead, and Gray guided them safely. There was no need for violence. The canyon had tested them all, and patience and strategy had won. Red Knife's capture was the result of intelligence, observation, and careful movement rather than force. The desert had shaped the outcome, and both men recognized the power of the land, the importance of patience, and the skill required to survive in such a harsh place. As the sun began to lower, Casting long shadows across the canyon, Gray and Red Knife stood face to face. There was no hatred, only acknowledgement of skill and courage. Red Knife had been captured, but he had done so with dignity, demonstrating the leadership and intelligence that had made him a legend. Gray collected the band carefully, ensuring their safety and respecting their knowledge of the land. The canyon had witnessed the end of the chase, a moment of triumph tempered by respect and understanding. The desert around them was quiet, the canyon walls reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Gray led Red Knife and his men to a safer location, preparing for the journey back to claim the bounty. Red Knife moved with calm composure, aware that the legend of his skill and leadership would remain even in capture. The canyon had been a test, and both men had passed in their own way. The sun had begun its slow descent over the Arizona desert, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and orange. Thomas Gray guided Red Knife and his small band carefully down the canyon paths, making sure every step was steady and controlled. The capture had been successful, but the work was not yet finished. The canyon was full of hidden dangers even now. Loose rocks, narrow ledges, and sudden drops required constant attention. Gray moved with caution, keeping his eyes on the path ahead and watching the movements of those behind him. Red Knife walked calmly, though his mind was alert. He had led men through more dangerous places than this canyon, and he knew the desert could be both harsh and protective. He had been captured, yes, but he had done so with dignity, without violence. The respect between the hunter and the hunted had been established during the confrontation. Red Knife's men followed him closely, trusting his judgment and understanding that the situation required discipline and patience. As they moved, the desert around them seemed to settle into a quiet rhythm. Birds called softly from the cliffs, and a gentle wind carried the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. Gray could feel the tension in the canyon easing, but he remained focused. The journey back to the towns and authorities would be long, and any mistake could still cause trouble. He kept a watchful eye, ensuring that everyone stayed safe and that no unexpected obstacles interfered with their path. Red Knife's thoughts wandered briefly to the people who had once feared him. He had been an outlaw, yes, but he had also been a protector of his people and their land. He remembered the raids that had been necessary for survival, the cattle taken to feed his band, and the careful planning required to evade capture. Now, as he walked beside the man who had finally cornered him, he reflected on the thin line between freedom and survival in this harsh land. Gray noticed the calm demeanor of Red Knife. There was no panic, no attempt at trickery or sudden movement. The man walked with quiet confidence, guiding his followers and ensuring that no one stumbled. Gray understood that this composure was the mark of a true leader, someone who had survived countless dangers and remained steady in the face of challenge. He respected Red Knife, even as he fulfilled his duty to bring him in. By late afternoon, the group reached a small clearing where the canyon opened into a wider plain. Here the sun warmed the rocks and sand, and the air seemed to breathe more freely. Gray allowed a brief pause. He and Red Knife took the moment to assess their surroundings. The band settled slightly, moving cautiously but with less tension than before. Gray offered a small amount of water and food to the men, ensuring their well-being. Red Knife accepted the gesture with a nod, acknowledging both the courtesy and the practicality. The journey ahead would take them to the nearest settlement, where Red Knife and his band could be formally turned over. Gray knew that the townsfolk were anxious, having heard the stories of raids, escapes, and the cleverness of the Apache leader. But he also knew that the capture had been made without bloodshed, a rare and notable achievement in the history of the frontier. Gray felt a sense of accomplishment, tempered by respect for the skill and intelligence of Red Knife. As evening approached, the desert sky turned from gold to pink and purple. Shadows stretched long across the sand, and the canyon walls glowed in the fading light. Gray and Red Knife continued their careful journey, moving slowly to ensure safety. The men of Red Knife's band remained alert, but they had begun to relax slightly, trusting that the careful steps forward would bring them safely to the settlement. The desert, which had tested them so fiercely, now seemed to guide them toward a conclusion. Gray reflected on the weeks of tracking, observing, and planning. He remembered the long hours of waiting, the close calls, and the careful reading of the desert's subtle signs. Every step, every choice, and every moment of patience had brought him here. He realized that the success of the capture was not only his own, but also the result of respect for the land, knowledge of patterns, and an understanding of human skill. Red Knife had been clever, resourceful, and patient, and those qualities had shaped the outcome. Red Knife, walking beside Gray, thought about the life he had led. He had survived as a leader and protector, navigating the dangers of the desert and the challenges of being hunted. He had lost his freedom, but he had retained his dignity. He had faced a skilled hunter who understood the land and the ways of the desert, and he recognized the fairness in the capture. For Red Knife, the desert had been both a teacher and a protector, and now it remained a witness to the end of one chapter in his life. By nightfall, the group made camp near a small water source, hidden from view but safe for the night. Gray and Red Knife shared a brief conversation, not in words of anger or accusation, but in the quiet understanding that had developed between them. The desert had taught lessons of patience, skill, and respect. Gray admired Red Knife's composure and leadership, while Red Knife acknowledged Gray's intelligence and careful planning. There was no animosity, only recognition of the trials they had faced. As the stars appeared in the night sky, bright and countless, Gray thought about the stories that would be told. The capture of Red Knife would be remembered, not just as an event of law and order, but as a tale of skill, patience, and strategy. Settlers, soldiers, and townsfolk would speak of the bounty hunter who had tracked the legendary Apache through the desert, and the man who had led his band through danger with dignity and intelligence. Red Knife's band settled into the night, using the terrain for cover and protection. They had learned from their leader to respect the land, to move with care, and to survive through patience and observation. Gray ensured that everyone was safe, understanding that the journey to the settlement was not yet complete. The canyon walls echoed softly with the sounds of the night, the wind through the rocks, the distant call of an owl, and the gentle rustle of desert plants. The land itself seemed to hold a quiet approval of the careful handling of the situation. By morning, the journey resumed. Gray led the group along well-known trails that avoided unnecessary risk while moving steadily toward the settlement. Red Knife and his band followed without resistance, trusting the guidance of the man who had finally outmaneuvered them without force. The desert stretched endlessly, but the path was clear and the final steps of the pursuit were approaching. As they neared the settlement, townsfolk gathered in cautious curiosity. They had heard tales of Red Knife's skill, his escapes, and the bounty that had drawn Gray to the desert. Now they witnessed the result. The legendary Apache leader and his band, calm and unharmed, guided by a man who had respected both the desert and his quarry. There was a quiet awe among the onlookers, a recognition that skill, patience, and intelligence had prevailed over fear and conflict. Red Knife was formally taken into custody, but the atmosphere remained respectful. Gray ensured that the men were treated fairly, acknowledging the skill and leadership that had allowed them to survive for so long. Settlers and officials could see that the capture had been accomplished with careful planning, patience, and respect for human life. The desert had shaped the outcome, and the story would become part of frontier history. In the days that followed, Red Knife and his band were held under supervision, their movements monitored, and their needs met. Gray reflected on the pursuit, understanding that the desert had taught him valuable lessons. The hunt had tested his patience, observation, and respect for the land, and he had succeeded not through force alone, but through careful strategy and understanding. Red Knife, too, reflected on the journey, acknowledging the skill of the hunter and the limits imposed by the land. The story of Red Knife's capture spread throughout the region. Settlers spoke of the clever bounty hunter who had tracked a legendary Apache through harsh deserts and dangerous canyons. Soldiers and townsfolk told tales of the canyon, the chase, and the final encounter, emphasizing the skill and intelligence displayed by both men. Red Knife's legend continued, not diminished by capture, but enhanced by the respect shown to him and his band. Gray returned to his own life, carrying the memory of the hunt, the desert, and the canyon. He knew that the lessons of patience, observation, and respect would remain with him forever. Red Knife's capture was not just a victory of law, but a story of the human spirit, the desert's challenges, and the careful balance between skill and caution. Red Knife, though captured, remained a figure of respect. His intelligence, leadership, and connection to the land had allowed him to survive where many others failed. The story of his pursuit and capture became part of the lore of Arizona, a tale told and retold to illustrate courage, patience, and the harsh beauty of the desert. Both men had left their mark on the land, their actions remembered as part of the history of the frontier. As the sun set over the wide plains beyond Diablo Canyon, the desert returned to its quiet rhythm. The winds whispered through the rocks, the stars appeared in the night sky, and the land held the stories of those who had walked it. Thomas Gray and Red Knife had met in the heart of the canyon, tested by terrain, skill, and patience. The hunt had ended, but the lessons and legends would endure. The canyon, the desert, and the desert people remained, holding the memory of courage, strategy, and respect for generations to come.